On a July morning in 1906, the skeleton of what would become America's most legendary hotel rose 18 stories above Fifth Avenue. Hundreds of men crawled across the steel girders like ants on iron bones, riveting, hammering, shaping what newspapers were already calling a marvel of modern construction. But on this particular morning, something darker was taking shape among those beams. Michael Butler was a retired policeman, hired to keep the peace between two warring factions of workers. The Iron Workers Union had been entrusted with erecting the plaza's steel frame, but cheaper non-union laborers had been brought in to handle simpler work. Tensions had been building for weeks. Insults flew. Fists were raised. The air crackled with fury. Then, without warning, a heavy metal bolt came spinning through the air. It struck Butler in the head. Before he could even fall, union workers swarmed him, rendering him unconscious with their boots and their fists. And then, in an act of cold brutality that would haunt this building forever, they threw him through a gap in the unfinished flooring. He plummeted from the 8th story to the 6th, his body crashing against steel and stone. By the time other patrolmen reached him, it was too late. Michael Butler would die in the hospital, becoming the Plaza Hotel's first victim before a single guest ever walked through its doors. A highly publicized trial followed. But in the end, Butler's death was declared an accident. Not a single iron worker claimed to have seen what happened. The building rose higher. The murder was buried beneath marble and gold, and the Plaza Hotel opened to the world with blood already woven into its foundation. Perhaps that is where the curse began. The three visionaries. To understand how this grand palace came to exist, we must travel back to the early 1900s, when New York City was transforming itself from a collection of neighborhoods into the greatest metropolis on Earth. Fifth Avenue was becoming the address of kings and captains of industry, and at the corner where Central Park kissed 59th Street, three men saw something no one else could imagine. The first was Bernhard Beinecke, a German-born financier with a sharp mind for real estate. He had watched the city's wealthy migrate northward, following the park like flowers turning toward sunlight. He knew that whoever controlled this corner controlled the gateway to Manhattan's most exclusive real estate. The second was Fred Sterry, a hotelier who had already proven himself at grand resorts across the country. He understood what wealthy travelers wanted. Not merely rooms, but an experience, a stage upon which to display their status to the world. And the third was Harry S. Black, a man whose very name would become synonymous with both triumph and tragedy. Born in Canada in 1863, Black had married the daughter of George Fuller, owner of the famous construction company that would one day build skyscrapers across America. When Fuller died in 1900, Black inherited not just a company, but an empire. Through mergers and acquisitions, he transformed the Fuller Construction Company into the United States Realty and Construction Company, one of the largest building concerns in America. His board of directors would eventually include railroad tycoons and ambassadors. Black was handsome, charming, and driven by an almost manic ambition. He collected buildings the way other men collected art. The Flatiron Building, that iconic wedge-shaped tower at 23rd Street, was his creation. But his true obsession, his masterpiece, would be the Plaza Hotel. A palace rises. In 1905, the three men purchased an existing hotel on the site, a modest 15-year-old structure that had served its purpose, but no longer matched their vision. They hired Henry Janeway Hardenberg, an architect who had already designed the legendary Waldorf Astoria Hotel 25 blocks south. Hardenberg was a master of grandeur, a man who believed buildings should tell stories. His design for the plaza was audacious. An 18-story French Renaissance chateau, rising from the corner of Fifth Avenue and Central Park South, like a dream carved in limestone and white brick. The style evoked the hunting lodges of French nobility, complete with mansard roofs, dormer windows and turrets at the corners that seemed to pierce the clouds. It would cost $12.5 million, an almost unimaginable sum in those days. Construction began immediately after the old hotel was demolished. The George Fuller Company was contracted to build it, and Harry Black watched over every detail. But as we have seen, even before the first guest arrived, violence had already stained the site. Michael Butler's death was hushed up, swept under the rising walls. The work continued at a feverish pace. 27 months later, on October 1st, 1907, the Plaza Hotel opened its doors to a crowd of astonished guests. Among the first to sign the pristine guest ledger was Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, one of the richest men in America. He strode through the revolving doors into a world of unprecedented luxury, unaware that in just 8 years, he would meet his own tragic end aboard the Lusitania, another monument to ambition that would be destroyed by forces beyond anyone's control. The opening was attended by the cream of American society. Diamond Jim Brady, the flamboyant financier known for his legendary appetite and his jewels. The actress Lillian Russell, whose beauty had captivated a generation. Producers David Belasco and Oscar Hammerstein. Even the writer Mark Twain wandered the halls, his white suit a beacon among the evening gowns and tuxedos. But behind the champagne and the laughter, a shadow was already forming. The panic of 1907 had just begun to grip the nation's economy. Banks were failing, fortunes were evaporating. The Plaza, born in a moment of supreme confidence, would have to prove itself in the teeth of a financial storm. Inside the dream. To walk through the Plaza in those early years was to enter another world entirely. The lobby stretched before visitors like a cathedral of commerce, its marble floors gleaming beneath crystal chandeliers that held over 1,600 pieces of hand-cut glass. The ceilings soared overhead, decorated with plasterwork so intricate that it seemed impossible that human hands could have created it. The Palm Court, at the hotel's heart, became the gathering place for society's elite. Beneath an ornate glass ceiling, ladies in silk gowns took afternoon tea while violinists played softly in the corner. The room was designed to make every guest feel like royalty, and it succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. The hotel contained 800 rooms, each furnished with a level of luxury that New York had never seen. The largest single order for gold-encrusted china in history had been placed with L. Strauss and Sons. 1,650 crystal chandeliers hung throughout the building. Every surface seemed to shimmer with wealth. But for Harry S. Black, the man who had made it all possible, the Plaza was never enough. Even as guests filled the rooms and critics praised his achievement, he was already planning his next conquest. The Savoy Plaza across the street. More hotels, more buildings, more power. His ambition was a hunger that could never be satisfied. The widows who saved the Plaza. As the 1920s roared into history, the Plaza found an unlikely savior in the most unexpected of places, the quiet apartments of wealthy widows. After the stock market crash of 1929 sent America spiraling into the Great Depression, many hotels struggled to survive. The lavish lifestyle that had seemed so natural in the boom years suddenly felt obscene as breadlines formed on the streets below. But the Plaza had something other hotels lacked: permanent residents. Wealthy women who had lost their husbands but not their fortunes had made the hotel their home. They lived in grand suites on the upper floors, attended by servants, surrounded by their own furniture and artwork. They paid their bills reliably, month after month, year after year, keeping the lights on when tourists stopped coming and business travelers tightened their belts. These women, whose names have largely been forgotten by history, became the financial lifeline that kept the Plaza from bankruptcy. Among them was Fanny Lowenstein, a divorcee who had arrived in 1958 and would remain for decades, becoming one of the hotel's most famous and most troublesome residents. But if the Depression tested the Plaza's survival, it also claimed its most important victim. The curse takes its creator. Harry S. Black had always lived on the edge. His business dealings were bold, sometimes reckless. He threw lavish parties and chased women with equal abandon. When Prohibition arrived in 1920, Black simply ignored it. He was caught bootlegging in 1921 when Prohibition agents raided his private Pullman train car in Coconut Grove, Florida, discovering $8,000 worth of illegal liquor hidden in secret compartments throughout the car. The trial should have been a disaster, but in a scene that seemed almost comical, the jury thoroughly inspected the evidence, sampling the illegal goods with considerable enthusiasm. They returned with a unanimous verdict of not guilty. Black walked free, his reputation enhanced rather than destroyed by the scandal. But the stock market crash of 1929 proved to be an enemy that even Harry Black could not charm or bribe his way past. His fortune, built on borrowed money and leveraged investments, began to crumble. Hotels that had seemed like gold mines became millstones around his neck. The Savoy Plaza, his newest creation, hemorrhaged money. On October 18, 1930, Harry Black made his final appearance at the Plaza Hotel. He walked into his suite on the 18th floor, the same building he had willed into existence a quarter-century before. There, in the bathtub of the palace he had built, he attempted to drown himself. Staff members found him and revived him. The newspapers reported only that he had suffered a nervous breakdown. But everyone in New York society knew the truth. The man who had built the plaza, who had reshaped Manhattan's skyline, who had seemed invincible for so long, had been broken by the very ambition that had made him great. Black never recovered. Months later, in the bedroom of his Long Island summer home, he completed what he had started in that plaza bathtub. He shot himself in the head. He was 66 years old. At the time of his death, Harry Black's estate was valued at $6 million, roughly $89 million in today's money. But for a man who had once controlled hundreds of millions, it was a pittance. His charity, the Harry S. Black and Alan Fuller Fund, would continue to help the sick and disabled for generations. But the Plaza Hotel passed to new hands, its original visionary destroyed by the very dream he had created. New masters, new fortunes. For the next several decades, the plaza changed hands like a prized jewel passed between collectors. Each new owner believed they could unlock its true potential. Each learned that the hotel had a way of consuming those who dared to claim it. In 1943, Conrad Hilton, the founder of the Hilton Hotel Empire, purchased the plaza for $7,400,000. It was a bargain price for a legendary property, made possible by the war years that had hollowed out tourism and travel. Hilton saw opportunity where others saw only risk. He made changes immediately. The Oak Bar, which had languished since Prohibition, was reopened. A ground-floor brokerage office that had paid a mere $416 a month in rent was evicted to make room for the expansion. Storage areas in the basement were converted into the Rendezvous Supper Club. Every inch of the hotel was examined for profit potential. When someone suggested that a display case in the lobby corridor could bring in $18,000 a year in rental income, Hilton reportedly said, "I don't know what a vitrine is, but if it will bring in $18,000, install it immediately." Under Hilton's ownership, the plaza survived the war years and emerged into the prosperity of the 1950s. Frank Lloyd Wright, the legendary architect, moved into suites 223 through 225, where he would live for the next 6 years. The hotel became a gathering place for artists, writers, and celebrities. In 1955, a writer named Kay Thompson, who had been performing in the hotel's Persian room, created a character that would become inseparable from the plaza's identity. She called her Eloise, a precocious 6-year-old girl who lived in the hotel with her nanny, her dog Weenie, and her turtle Skyperdy. The Eloise books would sell millions of copies and cement the plaza's place in American popular culture forever. But the greatest era of glamour was yet to come. The Golden Age. The 1960s transformed the Plaza into a stage for some of the most memorable moments in American cultural history. On February 7, 1964, 4 young men from Liverpool stepped out of a limousine and walked through the Plaza's doors, mobbed by screaming fans. The Beatles had arrived in America for the first time, and they had chosen the Plaza as their home during that historic week. John, Paul, George, and Ringo occupied an entire floor, their rooms surrounded by security as teenage girls attempted increasingly creative methods to reach their idols. The hotel's switchboard was flooded with calls, letters poured in by the thousands. Outside, fans maintained a vigil around the clock, their screams echoing off Fifth Avenue whenever a curtain twitched in an upper window. 2 years later, in November of 1966, the Plaza hosted what would become known as the Party of the Century. Truman Capote, fresh from the success of In Cold Blood, threw his legendary black and white ball in the Grand Ballroom. 540 guests, including Frank Sinatra, Mia Farrow, Candice Bergen, and Norman Mailer, arrived in black and white formal wear, their faces hidden behind elaborate masks. The party cost roughly $16,000 in 1966 money, a modest sum that produced maximum impact. It was Capote's declaration that he had arrived at the pinnacle of American society, and the Plaza was his stage. Photographs from that evening would become iconic images of an era that believed in glamour, in excess, in the power of style to transform reality. But even as the flashbulbs popped and the champagne flowed, dark clouds were gathering. The Plaza's next chapter would bring scandal, bankruptcy, and a new kind of owner whose ambition matched Harry Black's, but whose methods would prove even more destructive. The deal of a lifetime. In the spring of 1988, a brash New York real estate developer named Donald Trump did something that shocked even his admirers. He purchased the Plaza Hotel from Westin Hotels for $407.5 million, the highest price ever paid for a single hotel property in American history. Trump's announcement was vintage Trump. He took out a full-page advertisement in the New York Times with a headline that read simply, "Why I Bought the Plaza." In the ad, he compared the hotel to the Mona Lisa, calling it a masterpiece that transcended mere commerce. "I haven't purchased a building," he declared. "I have purchased a masterpiece. For the first time in my life, I have knowingly made a deal that was not economic. For I can never justify the price I paid, no matter how successful the Plaza becomes." It was an extraordinary admission from a man who had built his reputation on ruthless deal-making. But Trump wasn't just buying a hotel. He was buying a symbol. The Plaza represented everything he believed about wealth, status, and the power of beautiful things to transform ordinary people into something greater. He installed his wife, Ivana Trump, as the hotel's president. Her salary was famously reported as $1 a year plus all the dresses she could buy, an arrangement rumored to cost Trump around $500,000 annually. Ivana threw herself into the role with characteristic intensity, overseeing renovations, managing staff, and hosting the kind of society events that the Plaza had been built to accommodate. But trouble was already brewing. The marriage that had seemed so golden was about to explode in public view, and the hotel that Trump had called his Mona Lisa was about to become his greatest financial disaster. The divorce, the affair, the humiliation. In the winter of 1989, just a year after Trump had purchased his masterpiece, the carefully constructed facade of his marriage began to crack. During a family skiing vacation in Aspen, Ivana Trump encountered a young actress named Marla Maples. According to accounts that would soon fill every tabloid in America, Ivana confronted Marla on the slopes. The words that were supposedly exchanged, including Ivana's reported demand that Marla leave her husband alone, became the subject of endless speculation and gossip. By February of 1990, the affair was public knowledge, and the Trump marriage was over. The divorce proceedings became a spectacle that dominated New York media for months. Donald and Ivana fought over everything, from their mansions to their yachts to their children. In the middle of it all sat the Plaza Hotel, with Ivana locked out of her presidential office while lawyers argued over the terms of the separation. The scandal would have been damaging enough on its own, but it coincided with something far more serious. Trump's entire financial empire, built on borrowed money and leveraged debt, was beginning to collapse. The collapse begins. Trump had purchased the plaza at the peak of the 1980s real estate boom, borrowing heavily to finance the deal. His bankers had trusted his reputation, his bravado, his ability to turn any property into gold. But by 1990, the real estate market had turned cold. The properties that had seemed like certain winners were now bleeding cash. The plaza itself was drowning in debt. Trump had borrowed against the hotel's future revenues, confident that he could generate enough income to cover the interest payments. But the numbers simply didn't work. The hotel's expenses, including the massive debt service, exceeded what even the most optimistic projections could deliver. Behind the scenes, Trump was engaged in increasingly desperate negotiations with his bankers. Citibank and a consortium of other lenders held notes totaling more than $550 million on the plaza alone. When Trump couldn't make the payments, they came calling. At the same time, his marriage was being torn apart in public. Ivana, having lost her position at the plaza, stopped fighting over the divorce terms. It had become abundantly clear that Trump's billions were largely fictional, paper wealth that had evaporated in the crash. She agreed to the basic outline of their 1987 marriage contract, accepting $14 million in cash, a Greenwich mansion, an apartment in Trump Plaza, and access to Mar-a-Lago for 1 month each year. The divorce was finalized in 1992, the same year that would bring the ultimate humiliation for the man who had compared the plaza to the Mona Lisa. Bankruptcy. On November 2, 1992, Donald Trump filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection for the Plaza Hotel. It was the first bankruptcy in the hotel's 85-year history. For a building that had survived world wars, depressions, and the death of its own creator, being bankrupted by a single owner seemed almost impossible to believe. The filing ran nearly 1,500 pages, and the list of unpaid creditors read like a who's who of New York commerce. New York State was owed more than $800,000 in back sales taxes. Con Edison claimed nearly $300,000 for electricity. Manhattan Limousine had an outstanding bill of almost $200,000. Even Ada's Floral Decorators, Ivana's favorite florist, was asking for $85,000. In total, the plaza's assets were listed at $375 million. Its liabilities ran to nearly $480 million. Trump had managed to lose more than $100 million on what he had called a masterpiece. The bankruptcy was what is known as a prepackaged filing. By the time the papers were submitted, Trump and his lenders had already worked out a deal. Trump agreed to hand over 49% of the plaza to Citibank and the other creditors in exchange for easier payment terms on his debt. He would remain chairman in name, but the real power now belonged to the banks. For the plaza's staff, the bankruptcy was devastating. Christopher Nabel, the director of guest services at the time, would later describe it as a painful place to work. Layoffs came during the holidays, even when the hotel was full. The staff that remained had to balance the demands of bankruptcy with the expectations of guests who expected nothing but the best. Belts were tightened. Ivana was replaced by professional accountants whose only job was to cut costs and increase revenue. The glamour that had defined the Trump era gave way to the cold mathematics of debt restructuring. But even as the plaza struggled, Trump was already planning his next act. In December of 1993, he married Marla Maples in the grand ballroom of the very hotel he had just bankrupted. The irony seemed lost on him. 2 months earlier, Marla had given birth to their daughter, Tiffany. Now, surrounded by 1,000 guests beneath the crystal chandeliers, Trump celebrated his new beginning in the same room where so many of his old dreams had died, the Celebrity Parade. Despite its financial troubles, the plaza remained a magnet for the famous and infamous throughout the 1990s. In December of 1991, the hotel served as a filming location for Home Alone 2, with a young Macaulay Culkin wandering its halls and a cameo appearance by Trump himself. The movie would gross hundreds of millions of dollars and introduce a new generation to the plaza's magic. Celebrity weddings continued to draw attention. When Michael Douglas married Catherine Zeta-Jones in 2000, they chose the plaza's grand ballroom. The ceremony was reportedly one of the most expensive celebrity weddings in history, a fitting tribute to a hotel that had always valued spectacle over subtlety. But behind the flashbulbs and the famous faces, the plaza was passing through a series of owners, each trying to extract value from a property that seemed determined to resist exploitation. After Trump lost control, a partnership between Singapore's City Developments Limited and Saudi Prince Al Walid bin Talal took over. They would hold the property until 2004, when yet another transformation loomed. The Israeli developer and the massive renovation. In 2004, Elad Properties, a company controlled by Israeli billionaire Yitzhak Tshuva, purchased the plaza with ambitious plans. They would close the hotel entirely in 2005, embarking on a $450 million renovation that would transform the legendary property. The renovation was controversial from the start. Elad's original plans called for converting some of the hotel's most historic spaces into retail stores, a proposal that drew fierce opposition from preservationists. The plaza's public rooms had been designated as interior landmarks, and the battle over their fate became a test of how far new owners could push against history. In the end, the landmark's designation protected the Palm Court, the Oak Room, and the Grand Ballroom. But the rest of the hotel was transformed. About half of the rooms were converted into luxury condominiums, some selling for tens of millions of dollars. The plaza was no longer purely a hotel. It had become a hybrid, part hospitality venue, part residential address for the ultra-wealthy. When the renovated plaza reopened in 2008, it had been restored to something approaching its original glory. The public spaces gleamed once more. The chandeliers sparkled. But something had been lost in the transformation. The plaza that emerged was beautiful, but it was also different. The days when you could simply walk in off Fifth Avenue and rent a room for the night were over. Now much of the building belonged to private owners who had paid millions for the privilege of calling it home. And waiting in the wings was an owner whose story would prove darker than anyone could have imagined. An Indian tycoon who would run the plaza from a prison cell 7,000 miles away, accused of one of the largest financial frauds in his country's history. In 2012, a new name appeared on the Plaza Hotel's ownership documents. Sahara India Parawar, one of the largest conglomerates in India, purchased the iconic property for $570 million. At the helm of this empire stood Subrata Roy, a man who had risen from nothing to become one of the most powerful businessmen in Asia. His story seemed like the ultimate rags-to-riches tale, but within 2 years, it would become something far darker. Subrata Roy was born in 1948 in the small town of Araria, in the eastern Indian state of Bihar. His family had little money, and young Subrata grew up understanding the value of hard work and ambition. In 1978, with just 2,000 rupees in capital, roughly $24, he founded what would become the Sahara Group. His business model was simple but revolutionary. He offered financial services to India's vast population of poor and working-class citizens, people who had no access to traditional banks. Millions of Indians, many of them illiterate villagers, trusted Roy with their small savings. They called him Saharasri, a title of respect that roughly translates to the essence of Sahara. Employees bowed at his feet, Investors treated him like a living god. By the 2000s, Roy's empire had grown beyond anyone's imagination. The Sahara Group claimed to employ over 1.2 million people, making it the second largest employer in India after the government-run Indian Railways. Roy owned television channels, newspapers, a Formula One racing team, and luxury hotels around the world. He built a 300-acre estate in Lucknow that included replicas of the White House and Buckingham Palace. His son's wedding in 2004 attracted 10,000 guests, including Bollywood stars and the Prime Minister of India. When Roy purchased the Plaza Hotel, along with London's Grosvenor House and the Dream Downtown Hotel in New York, it seemed like the natural expansion of his global empire. The boy from Bihar had conquered the world. He now owned one of the most famous addresses in America. But the foundation of his fortune was already crumbling, the fraud revealed. In 2010, India's Securities and Exchange Board began investigating two of Roy's companies. What they found was staggering. Sahara India Real Estate Corporation and Sahara Housing Investment Corporation had raised approximately 24,000 crore rupees, nearly $4 billion, from over 30 million investors through bonds that regulators deemed illegal. The scheme was breathtaking in its scope. Roy had collected money from poor and middle-class Indians across the country, promising them returns on investments that may never have existed. When investigators demanded proof of these investors' identities, Sahara sent 127 trucks containing over 30,000 cartons of paperwork to the regulator's office. Many of the names and addresses turned out to be fictitious. In some cases, when authorities asked Sahara to produce specific investors, the company could only locate a fraction of them. The Supreme Court of India ordered Roy to refund the money to investors, but the billions had already been spent, much of it on trophy properties like the Plaza Hotel. Roy found himself in an impossible position. He couldn't pay what he owed, and he couldn't sell his assets fast enough to raise the money. In February of 2014, the Supreme Court issued a non-bailable warrant for Subrata Roy's arrest. He had failed to appear in court, claiming he needed to care for his elderly mother. The excuse did not impress the judges. On February 28th, Roy surrendered to police in Lucknow. The man who had called himself the guardian of India's largest family was taken to Tihar jail, the largest prison complex in South Asia, running a hotel from prison. What happened next was almost unprecedented in the history of luxury hospitality. Subrata Roy, accused of defrauding 30 million people, continued to run the Plaza Hotel from his prison cell 7,000 miles away in Delhi. The Supreme Court, recognizing that Roy needed to sell assets to pay back investors, granted him extraordinary privileges. He was allowed to use an air-conditioned conference room inside the prison, equipped with phones, internet access, and 3 secretaries. From this makeshift office behind bars, he attempted to negotiate the sale of his international hotel properties, including the Plaza. For months, potential buyers came and went. Deals were announced and then collapsed. In one particularly embarrassing episode, a company called Mirach Capital claimed to have secured funding from Bank of America for a major investment in Sahara. When Bank of America denied any involvement, the deal fell apart amid accusations of forged documents and bad faith. Meanwhile, the Plaza Hotel carried on, its guests largely unaware that their iconic address was being managed by a man sitting in an Indian prison. The chandeliers still sparkled. The Palm Court still served afternoon tea. The doorman still greeted arrivals with professional smiles. But somewhere in the background, the curse of the Plaza continued to claim its victims. Roy spent over 2 years in Tihar jail before being released on parole in 2016. By then, his empire was in ruins. The Forbes estimate of his net worth, once over $10 billion, had collapsed. His attempts to sell the Plaza dragged on through years of legal battles and competing buyers. The battle for the Plaza. The struggle over ownership of the Plaza Hotel became a tangled web of lawsuits, broken deals, and international intrigue. Multiple parties claimed the right to purchase the property. At various points, developers from New York, Dubai, and Saudi Arabia all believed they had secured agreements to buy the legendary hotel. In 2018, the chaos finally resolved when Qatar Hospitality, a company owned by the Qatar Investment Authority, acquired full ownership of the plaza. The deal was valued at approximately $600 million. After years of uncertainty, the hotel finally had an owner with the resources to maintain it properly. But Subrata Roy's story did not end happily. He remained entangled in legal battles in India, his reputation destroyed, his fortune gone. In November of 2023, at the age of 75, Subrata Roy died of cardiac arrest following a prolonged illness. The man who had once owned the Plaza Hotel, who had been worshipped by millions, who had built palaces and collected properties around the world, passed away with his legacy forever tainted by accusations of fraud. He became another name on the list of owners whom the plaza had consumed, the scandals that never stopped. Throughout its history, the Plaza Hotel has attracted scandal the way its chandeliers attract light. Some of these stories became front-page news. Others remained whispered rumors in the corridors of power. Just 1 month after the hotel opened in 1907, a British actress named Mrs. Patrick Campbell created the plaza's first public controversy. She was staying at the hotel while performing in a production of Hedda Gabler on Broadway. One evening, she walked into the Palm Court, sat down for dinner, and did something shocking. She lit a cigarette. In that era, women simply did not smoke in public. The head waiter rushed over and demanded she extinguish it immediately. Mrs. Campbell reportedly looked at him coolly and said, "I understand this is a free country. I shall do nothing to change it." The restaurant staff, horrified but unable to physically remove a paying guest, erected privacy screens around her table while she finished smoking. The incident made national headlines. Newspapers debated the evils of smoking and the proper behavior of ladies in public spaces. The controversy eventually contributed to broader discussions about smoking regulations that would reshape American society. All because one actress refused to put out her cigarette at the plaza. Decades later, the hotel would be connected to far more serious allegations. Susan Rosenstiel, the wife of a prominent distiller, claimed in a tell-all book that she had once witnessed FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover attending parties at the plaza dressed in women's clothing, complete with a wig, makeup, and heels. The story was later discredited, but it added to the plaza's reputation as a place where the powerful came to indulge their secrets. In more recent times, the hotel served as the backdrop for public meltdowns and confessions. It was at the plaza that Woody Allen held his infamous press conference admitting his relationship with Soon-Yi Previn, his partner's adopted daughter. The actor Charlie Sheen was arrested at the plaza during his very public breakdown in 2010. The hotel's elegant rooms had witnessed triumph and tragedy in equal measure. The widows who wouldn't leave. Among the strangest chapters in the plaza's history is the saga of its permanent residents, particularly the elderly widows who refused to be evicted no matter who owned the building. When Donald Trump purchased the plaza in 1988, he had grand plans to convert the upper floors into ultra-luxury condominiums. But standing in his way were the hotel's longtime residents, many of them widows who had lived there for decades and were protected by New York's rent control laws. The most famous of these was Fanny Lowenstein, who had arrived at the plaza in 1958 as a young divorcee. Over the years, she had watched owners come and go, each one trying and failing to dislodge her from her rent-controlled apartment. When Trump's renovation plans threatened her home, she launched what observers called a guerrilla war against him. Lowenstein complained constantly about construction noise and dust. She claimed the renovation was making it difficult to breathe, shrinking her curtains, and causing mold to grow on her Steinway grand piano. She called city inspectors repeatedly, demanding they investigate conditions in the building. She wrote endless letters to management, documenting every grievance. Trump, who had navigated bitter divorces and billion-dollar bankruptcies, found Fannie Lowenstein to be one of his most formidable opponents. He reportedly told the National Enquirer, "Ivana and Marla have been a lot to handle, but my relationships with them have been smooth as silk in comparison to my contacts with Fannie Lowenstein. When she's done with me, I'm soaked in sweat." In the end, Lowenstein and the other widows outlasted Trump. They remained in their apartments as owners came and went, their rent-controlled leases protecting them from the forces of wealth and ambition that swirled around them. Some of them lived out their final years in the same rooms where they had spent decades, dying peacefully in the hotel they refused to leave. The pandemic and the empty palace. In March of 2020, the Plaza Hotel faced something unprecedented in its 113-year history. The COVID-19 pandemic swept through New York City, and for the first time ever, the hotel closed its doors entirely. The grand lobby fell silent. The Palm Court stood empty, its tables unoccupied, its chandeliers shining on no one. The hallways where Beatles fans had screamed and society matrons had paraded grew still and dark. Hundreds of employees were laid off as tourism collapsed and the world locked down. For more than a year, the plaza remained a ghost of itself. The pandemic that had emptied Times Square and shuttered Broadway also dimmed the lights at 5th Avenue and 59th Street. When the hotel finally reopened in May of 2021, it was to a changed world. Social distancing requirements forced the rearrangement of the Palm Court's famous tables. Hand sanitizer stations appeared next to the marble columns. The masks worn by staff and guests alike seemed almost surreal against the backdrop of Gilded Age elegance. By the mid-2020s, many of the condominiums that had been carved from the hotel's upper floors had decreased in value. Competition from newer luxury developments nearby, combined with complaints about building maintenance, had taken their toll. The plaza remained beautiful, but it was no longer the undisputed queen of New York hotels. The world had moved on, even as the building tried to hold on to its past. The stories they tell. The plaza has been immortalized in film, literature, and popular culture more than almost any other building in America. F. Scott Fitzgerald set crucial scenes from The Great Gatsby within its walls, using the hotel as a symbol of the hollow glamour that defined the Jazz Age. When Jay Gatsby confronts Tom Buchanan in that sweltering suite, with Daisy caught between them, the plaza becomes a stage for the American dream's ultimate failure. Alfred Hitchcock chose the plaza as a location for North by Northwest, his masterpiece of mistaken identity and Cold War paranoia. Cary Grant's Roger Thornhill is kidnapped from the hotel's Oak Bar, beginning an odyssey that would take him across the country. The scene established the plaza as a place where ordinary life could suddenly become extraordinary, where danger lurked beneath the veneer of civilization. Home Alone. 2 brought the plaza to a new generation in 1992, with young Kevin McAllister wandering its halls, charging room service to his father's credit card, and ultimately outwitting the same burglars who had tormented him in the first film. For millions of children who watched that movie, the plaza became a symbol of everything magical about New York City, a fantasy palace where anything was possible. And of course, there was Eloise. Kay Thompson's creation captured something essential about the plaza's appeal. The idea that a child could live in a hotel, surrounded by adults, making her own rules, turning the entire building into her playground. Eloise was mischievous, but never malicious, independent, but never lonely. She represented the freedom that wealth could provide, filtered through the innocent eyes of a 6-year-old. The hotel embraced Eloise as its unofficial mascot. Her portrait hung in the lobby for years. A special Eloise suite was created for young guests. The character became inseparable from the plaza's identity, a reminder that beneath all the grandeur and drama, the hotel could also be a place of joy, the pattern of destruction. Standing back and looking at the Plaza Hotel's history, a disturbing pattern emerges. The building has consumed nearly everyone who has tried to possess it. Harry S. Black, who built the hotel and made it his masterpiece, died by his own hand after attempting suicide in its bathtub. His fortune, his marriage, his reputation, all of it crumbled in the years after the plaza opened. Donald Trump, who called the hotel his Mona Lisa, became the first owner in its history to bankrupt it. His marriage to Ivana collapsed in public scandal. His attempt to turn the plaza into a personal monument ended in humiliation and debt. Subrata Roy purchased the plaza at the height of his power and lost everything shortly after. He went from being worshipped as a living god to sitting in a prison cell, desperately trying to sell the very property he had bought as a symbol of his global ambition. He died with his legacy in ruins. Even the smaller players in the plaza's story seemed touched by misfortune. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, the hotel's first registered guest, drowned on the Lusitania just 8 years after signing that pristine guest book. Conrad Hilton's ownership, while successful, came during years of personal turmoil and family drama. Is it a curse? Perhaps that is too simple an explanation. Perhaps the plaza simply attracts a certain type of person, those whose ambition outstrips their wisdom, whose hunger for status blinds them to the dangers of overreach. The hotel is a monument to excess, and excess has a way of destroying those who worship at its altar. Or perhaps Michael Butler's ghost still walks those halls, his blood forever woven into the foundation, his murder unavenged, his spirit demanding payment from everyone who dares to call the plaza their own. The architecture of permanence. Henry Janeway Hardenberg died in 1918, just 11 years after his masterpiece opened its doors. He never knew that his creation would become the most famous hotel in America, or that it would witness so much triumph and tragedy. But perhaps he understood even then that he was building something larger than any single owner could contain. The plaza's design was meant to evoke permanence. Its French Renaissance style, with those soaring turrets and elegant mansard roofs, deliberately recalled the great chateau of European nobility. Hardenberg wanted guests to feel that they were entering a world that had existed for centuries, even though the building was brand new. The illusion worked. Visitors from the moment of opening felt that they were stepping into history. The materials he chose reinforced this sense of timelessness. Ohio limestone formed the base, warm and golden in the morning light. White brick climbed the upper stories, punctuated by terracotta ornaments and wrought iron balconies. The rounded turrets at the corners gave the building a fairy tale quality, as if a castle had been transplanted from the Loire Valley to Manhattan. It was architecture as seduction, and like all great seductions, it came with hidden costs. What the walls remember. Today, the Plaza Hotel still stands at the corner of Fifth Avenue and Central Park South, just as it has for over a century. The white brick facade still gleams in the afternoon sun. The doormen still greet arrivals with practiced courtesy. The Palm Court still serves afternoon tea beneath its ornate glass ceiling. Tourists still pose for photographs in front of the grand entrance. Brides still walk down the aisle in the grand ballroom. Children who have read the Eloise books still drag their parents through the lobby, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fictional girl who made the plaza her home. But if you walk through those halls with knowledge of what has happened there, the building feels different. The marble floors that gleam so beautifully are the same floors that were laid by workers who witnessed a murder and said nothing. The chandeliers that sparkle so magnificently are the same chandeliers that lit Harry Black's final days at the hotel he built. The grand ballroom where society celebrates its triumphs is the same room where Trump married his second wife, while his first bankruptcy was still fresh. Every surface holds a story. Every corner remembers. The bellhops who have worked at the plaza for decades will tell you, if you ask them quietly, that the building has a presence. Not ghosts exactly, but something. A weight of history that presses down on those who spend enough time within its walls. Some employees love it, others find it unsettling, but none of them deny that the plaza is more than just a building. It is a living monument to ambition, dreams, and the price that both can exact. The Eternal Palace. In the end, the Plaza Hotel endures. Owners come and go. Fortunes rise and fall. Scandals erupt and fade. But the building itself remains, as solid and beautiful as the day Henry Janeway Hardenberg first imagined it, rising from the corner of Fifth Avenue. Perhaps that is the true lesson of the Plaza's story. The hotel is not cursed. It is simply eternal in a way that its owners are not. It was built to outlast the men who created it, and it has. It will outlast the current owners, and the next ones, and the ones after that. 100 years from now, when the names Trump and Roy and Black have faded from memory, the plaza will still stand, welcoming new guests into its marble embrace. The hotel cares nothing for the dreams of those who claim to possess it. It cannot be owned, not truly. It can only be borrowed for a time, maintained for a season, before passing to the next ambitious soul who believes they can tame it. Michael Butler's blood dried long ago. Harry Black's desperate splashing in that bathtub has been forgotten by all but historians. The bankruptcy filings have yellowed in courthouse archives. The prison cell where Subrata Roy tried to negotiate the hotel's sale sites empty now, its temporary occupant long gone. But the plaza remains. It stands where Fifth Avenue meets the park, where old money once paraded and new money now celebrates, where the ghosts of Gilded Age ambition mingle with the selfies of modern tourists. It is beautiful and terrible, welcoming and hungry, a palace that has destroyed its kings while remaining forever magnificent. If you visit, take a moment to pause in the lobby. Look up at the soaring ceilings, the intricate plasterwork, the chandeliers that have witnessed more than a century of human drama. Think of Michael Butler, falling through the unfinished floors. Think of Harry Black, broken by his own creation. Think of Trump, bankrupt in his masterpiece. Think of Roy, running his empire from a prison cell. Then walk out through those famous doors, back onto Fifth Avenue, back into the ordinary world. Leave the plaza behind, as so many have before you. Let it keep its secrets and its ghosts. The hotel will still be there when you are gone. It will still be there when we are all gone. Rising 18 stories above the park, gleaming white against the New York sky, beautiful and patient and eternal. The cursed palace that destroyed its owners, standing proud and unrepentant, waiting for the next dreamer bold enough to try.